What's up, hello, my name is Emma, and today I'm going to be talking about every single book I read this summer. So yes, I unfortunately did not have the time to make any of my monthly wrap-ups this past summer, so I'm going to be talking about all 24 books that I read in this one video. It does cover all of my reading from June all the way through September. Quite ambitious, but I think it is going to be an interesting one. I of course read a ton of YA books, I read some adult, even some nonfiction, fantasy, romance, thriller, dystopian, and we have a full diverse range of ratings all the way from 5 stars to 1 star. I hope you are ready because I am not. Starting off, I decided to reread an old school favorite series of mine all the way through, and that is The Darkest Minds by Alexandra Bracken. This is a dystopian series about a future where the majority of teens and children have been wiped out by a virus, and those who have survived gain superhuman abilities, and it is all about the government trying to control them. I loved this series all the way through. It got 5 stars when I first read it, and I've kind of been in the mood to pick up the recently released sequel to the series that is like a continuation, so I decided to read them all, and I'm happy to say for the most part I had very similar feelings. My updated ratings for each book are 5 stars, 4 stars, and 3 stars. I feel like the world of this series is so thorough and well put together. I can really now appreciate reading them a second time how many layers and all of the complexities that Alex Bracken wrote into building it. I adore the characters of the series. It has to be one of my favorite literary casts ever, just because the characters are so authentic and well developed. They are the type of characters that feel like your friends. With Never Fade, I did enjoy it a little bit less, but ultimately it was still a satisfying sequel all these years later. Number one, I loved the expansion on the political arc in Never Fade. It just has really been built on and is so much bigger than what's introduced in book 1. I also love the character growth in this book. I had a lot of fun toying with who I agreed with and whose actions sort of turned me off, and I felt actually more angry with some of the characters than I ever did when I was 17, so that was an interesting experience. Within the Afterlight, definitely did not enjoy it as much. It honestly was just way less entertaining than the other installments. The pacing was very slow. The story felt very stationary, like the characters were stuck in one location for the majority of the book and there wasn't a ton of action until the very end. Again, the character and relationship development was so great. That's something that Alexandra Bracken does incredibly well, and also the dealings between the government and the resistant became way more complex, but overall the story just didn't wow me as much as the first 2. Next up, I finished the last 2 stories in the Ghosts of the Shadow Market bind up by Cassandra Clare, Sarah Reese Brennan, Maureen Johnson, Kelly Link, and Robin Wasserman. This is a collection of novellas set in the world of the Shadowhunter Chronicles, and it follows one character named Brother Zachariah, and also like a million other characters spread throughout time from this world. These are a little hard to talk about because everything about them is spoilery for the other books in this series, but I read The Lost World and I gave it 4.5 out of 5 stars. It was one of my favorites of the entire collection. What I loved about this novella is out of everything in this book, this felt the most like Cassie's individual writing, which I always love seeing because sometimes in the novellas where it's co-authored, it's harder to find her individual voice, but it was present and right there. And I also loved the insight and perspective we got from a character that I'll just say we never expected to hear from again, so that was a very exciting part of it. And then with the final novella, Forever Fallen, I gave it 4 stars. I found the story very entertaining. It is from the perspective of a new character we are introduced to called Janus. I hate that name. But oh my god, is he so fun to read about. My issue is it just sort of felt a little thrown together. We have one very strong storyline following getting to know Janus and his motivations, his plans, his characterization. And then we have this plot between Brother Zachariah and Cait. And they were both great and I loved them, but they just had no connection whatsoever. And it stood out because pretty much every other novella, when there's multiple storylines, they're connected. And I also got very mad during this novella because there is a very out of character deal made, and I just have no idea, like, what would possess this character to do that. So it felt a little off to me. With Ghost of the Shadow Market as a whole, I give it a 4-star rating because it has some of my favorite novellas I've ever read from this series, and like I've read all of them, but others were very underwhelming, so a settled 4 stars. Next, I have a book that I DNF'd or did not finish. Scandalous. Not really, I'll explain, but the book is There Will Come a Darkness by Katie Rose Poole. This is an ancient Roman fantasy. It follows 5 different characters as there is this like prophecy that the whole world is gonna come down in darkness, you know, ancient Roman stuff. Now, I really liked this book and I pushed through hard. I got like 278 pages in. I was like 2/3 of the way done. I liked the characters. It was a very diverse cast, and especially the magic system was very unique and complex. But listen, I went through a breakup while I was reading this book, and my mind was just like, girl, you are not reading this super intense high fantasy while you're going through this and in a super intense summer course. It's just not happening. There's like at least 5 different perspectives, and even as far as I got into this book, they hadn't all matched up yet, and it was still like very distinct different motivations and things going on. It was just too much to handle. So I put it down. I'd like to come back to it at some point, but it's just not a priority at the moment. You know, I do DNF books fairly often, but they just aren't as intense in that where I get decently into a book and decide to stop continuing. It's mostly like, oh, let me like rent this through Libby on my library. I don't like it after an hour, let me return it. But if you'd like me to just mention what books those are in these types of wrap-ups in the future, let me know. The next book I did complete this summer is Wilder Girls by Rory Power. This is a young adult horror Lord of the Flies retelling all about a school of girls on an island that becomes consumed by this sort of like airborne phenomenon type thing that like changes all of them and the other things on the island themselves. I thought I was going to love this book, and I was kind of a little underwhelmed. I ended up giving it 3 out of 5 stars. My favorite thing about this book is that I was really impressed by the writing style. This is a debut and it does not feel like it at all. Rory Power just has a really gorgeous prose and like the most incredible choice of syntax that I would definitely read from her again in the future, even though I wasn't wowed by this one. It's a hard book to categorize because like it feels like it's set in like a pretty modern day, but it also has this supernatural, paranormal, maybe science fiction thing going on, but it's also like a thriller horror. Whatever it is, it actually sort of felt dystopian to me, which I really enjoyed because it's hard to find a good dystopian these days. Like, not only are they not being written, but the ones that are just aren't fabulous. I will say it is very gory. If you were grossed out by like nasty body gore, like this is not the book for you. My friend had warned me, but I just like was not expecting it to be on every single page. Where this book started turning me off is that the catalyst for the plot is an overheard conversation, and it just felt like this book was so beyond that with the impressive writing. And it's a recurring theme throughout this book where like overhearing different conversations is what forwards the plot, because I wrote overhearing with exclamation points on my notes and I didn't realize until later that I had already written it above. It was pretty slow. When it was characterized as horror, I was like expecting to be scared and I wasn't. I was just grossed out. The main characters were super developed and I really liked them, but the side characters got no attention, so there were just some flaws in it that made me not love it. Overall though, the book was really unique and I had not read anything like it. I just was expecting more from the execution. But again, I definitely would read more from Rory Power in the future. The next book I finished this summer is Red, White, and Royal Blue by Casey McQuestion. I listened to this on audio. I've talked about it so much on my channel since I've read it. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. I really enjoyed it. It's about the first son of America and the Prince of England, and they're enemies, but then they kiss and they fuck, and it's great. I'm like a little tired of talking about this in a video format, but I love discussing the content because it was super fun. It's got the laughs, it's got the steamy romance. It really is as good as everyone else says. If you're looking for something lighthearted and engaging that's gonna want to keep you reading, this is something you should pick up. Next up, I read Unwind by Neil Shusterman. This is like a super old school young adult dystopian series, and it takes place in a world where parents can basically like unwind their kids and sort of like harvest their organs. I'm not doing a good job explaining this. Parents can have their child unwound, whereby all of the child's organs are transplanted into different donors so life doesn't technically end. Which is kind of bullshit, which we'll talk about later. As a self-proclaimed Neal Shusterman fan, I did not like this book. I gave it 2 out of 5 stars. If you're interested in hearing more of my thoughts on Unwind, I did read it for the Paper Cut Book Club's live show discussion, so I'll link that below if you want to hear more of our in-depth discussion on why we all did not like this book. I just think Neal Shusterman did not achieve what he was trying to with this book. Like, it's supposed to be about like reproductive rights and a war over it, and it just wasn't that. I had to suspend my disbelief a lot in this book because a lot of what happens and like the reasoning behind things just doesn't make any sense. The character dynamics were super forced. Like, I just don't understand where I'm supposed to get this idea that the characters care for one another, and the romance was just not good. Yes, my Hogwarts letter just fell. It was not a ghost. It was an unwound child because life goes on. Also, the pacing was not good. Ultimately, there was not a lot I liked about this book. I was like kind of interested in it. That's what gave it 2 stars. But overall, not for me. The next audiobook I listened to this summer was Aurora Rising by J. Kristoff and Amy Kaufman. This is a science fiction novel about a misfit band of like space cadets who go off on a journey and stumble upon a girl who is woken up 200 years later and like no one knows why. One of the things I did not like about this book is that the pacing was very off. It would be super action-packed, lots of fight scenes for a very long period of time, and then for an equally long period of time you would have so much character development and relationship development and lots of dialogue and lots of not action, and it was very off-putting. I felt the characters had so much potential, but there were just too many of them. There's like 7 characters, and you just couldn't give attention to all of them. Like, there's one character, and all of her chapters, which are very minimal in number, are like 1 sentence or 1 paragraph, and obviously it's intentional, but it's annoying. I have very mixed feelings on the romances in this book. I really liked that in the beginning. I kind of couldn't tell who everyone was going to be paired up with. It seemed like a lot of characters had potential romantic energy with each other. So it was fun when I couldn't tell, but as soon as they all got paired off, it got really boring and bland, and there was nothing unique about any of them. And then nearing the end, I just lost interest, I lost focus. It wasn't a great experience. Thinking back now, I honestly might drop that to at least like 2.5 stars. It just wasn't a great reading experience. I thought it had a lot of potential. I enjoyed a lot of the audiobook, not all of it, but most of it. It was just kind of a dud to me. Next book I read this summer was Let's Call It a Doomsday by Katie Henry. This is about a girl with an anxiety disorder who is always preparing for doomsday to come when she meets another girl who believes that she has predicted when doomsday is going to happen. This was one of my most anticipated of the year, and while it did not turn out to be one of my favorites, I still thought it was really good and I thoroughly enjoyed my time reading it. Katie Henry is very funny, and that always comes out in her books. I will say Let's Call It a Doomsday is like a little less funny than Heretics Anonymous, but I feel like the discussion of topics going on is a little bit more intense. The characters are all super lovable, and I especially love this book's attention on friendship between 2 girls. It is just so important for people to make these sort of connections as teenagers and as they're growing into themselves, and I just thought that this book did such a great job exploring that along with all of the other topics. It's a heartwarming read with a little bit of emotional intensity. I really enjoyed it and would definitely recommend. It only just occurred to me how obvious my bruise from dance class is. Next up, I randomly decided to pick up like an entire adult thriller series, which is Stillhouse Lake by Rachel Kane. This story follows a woman who finds out her husband is a serial killer and has been torturing and murdering women in their garage. So when he is imprisoned, she sort of has to move all around the country trying to protect herself and her children from the online people who have been harassing her, thinking that she's a part of it. I really liked the first book in the series. I was very close to giving it 5 stars just because it was so entertaining and I like could not stop reading, but I settled on 4. What I liked about this book is that the main character is super paranoid, like for good reason, obviously, because her husband is a serial killer and she's being harassed by people because they think that she's also a murderer. But a lot of times her suspicions were shown to be over exaggerated. So I had a lot of fun like changing my view and my theories all throughout the story because I had to determine like when can I believe that she's onto something and when is she just being paranoid. So yeah, book 1 was fun. Book 2 I gave 3 out of 5 stars. It still was enjoyable and there were things that I liked that were changed, but it just wasn't as great as the first one. I really like that we get new perspectives in book 2. The first is totally told from Gwen's perspective, and then we get introduced to her kid's perspective as well as her boyfriend. So that all added to the story in a great way. Something I didn't like is that like as soon as the end of the events of book 1, like the main character just like isn't paranoid anymore, and it felt very abrupt, and like what I loved about book 1 was not in book 2 at all. It was odd. And also I loved how book 1 was super centralized and it was like this small scale story, but in book 2 it really expands and gets much bigger than it was, and I just didn't think it worked as well for this storyline. Book 3 I originally gave 3 stars, but I'm gonna drop it to 2 because if I'm honest, I don't remember anything about this book. If it's not memorable whatsoever, it can't have been that good. What I do remember about this book is that it felt similar to book 1 in terms of like how the story went and the direction of it, but it also was still like so much bigger and more outlandish, and I just didn't like the direction of this story. There is a 4th book that's out or coming out. I don't know if I will continue with it. I might, just because I like randomly invested so much time into this series, but it's sort of been on a decline and I'm not sure how much I would enjoy the next. The next audiobook I listened to this summer was Royals by Rachel Hawkins. This is a story of a girl whose sister gets engaged to the Prince of Scotland, and so she gets thrown into this media frenzy and has to spend the summer in Scotland. I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. It was fine. It was okay. It just did not do much for me. I did like the characters. Like the main character Daisy is really quick-witted and funny, and that was cool to see because I feel like I don't encounter many characters that have her specific level of humor. And I felt the side characters were also pretty developed. The story was fun. It was very fluffy, lighthearted, contemporary, romance, drama. And I feel like I entered this book with the idea of it being very predictable, and I feel like a lot of what I predicted isn't the way things went. Ultimately, I just feel like it wasn't like a super fulfilling read. It was fun, it was fine, just not more than that. If I'm honest, I don't remember a lot about this book either. Listen, it's been like 2 months since I've read this book. I've read a lot of books in between. Give me a break. Next up is a book I actually did really enjoy, and that is Frankly in Love by David Yoon. This is about a Korean-American boy named Frank whose parents want him to date someone that is also Korean American. So he begins fake dating someone that his parents approve of so he can date another white girl. I really liked Frankly in Love and ended up giving it 4 out of 5 stars. It felt like a very realistic book for high school teenagers. I love that it really showed a strong relationship and friendship between 2 boys, because that's something that is often shied away from being presented in media. So I really appreciated the detail put into that relationship as well as all of Frank's other relationships. You know, I love a fake dating trope, and it went well in this book, but the love triangle honestly was just a bit too flip-floppy for me. I feel like people's feelings changed way too quickly, and that's just a peeve of mine. Frank also has a really unique hobby of what is like sound music engineering. He like takes sounds from everyday life and makes songs out of them, and I thought that was really unique to read about. The writing style wasn't for me. It was a bit more casual for my taste, but I thought the humor was really great in this book. It had some like laugh out loud worthy moments, and I also felt that the ending was a bit anticlimactic and predictable. Like, it was sweet and whatnot, but also some of it was underdeveloped in my opinion. But overall, I really enjoyed my experience reading this book, and I'm excited to see what else David Yoon puts out in the future. The next book I read over the summer is Something Like Gravity by Amber Smith, which was another one of my most anticipated reads of the year. It's about a girl named Maya who is dealing with the loss of her sister and a trans boy named Chris, who is still coping with a lot of the issues related to his identity. Honestly, I didn't love this book. I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. There just wasn't anything special about it. I think it does a pretty adequate job discussing a lot of the more sensitive topics that are included, like loss and assault and being trans, but it just felt very surface level, like there wasn't a lot of nuance to it, and of course, like I can't speak or give any sort of insight into how the trans identity is being portrayed in this book. The writing was pretty corny in my opinion, which was surprising and upsetting because I have loved Amber Smith's writing in the past and I just don't know what happened there. This is an example of a very small scale story that doesn't work well because it really just follows like Maya, Chris, and their families, and there's not enough forwarding the story in this case. The side characters were very underdeveloped, and both of the main characters treat their friends like crap all the way through. Like, I get it's essential for character development for this plot, but like, why do you gotta do them like that? And also, the ending was very unsatisfying. It was too quick, not fleshed out enough, and it just didn't end on a high note. The book was enjoyable for the most part, and it's not like overtly offensive to me in any way. It just didn't really hold up to what else I have read from Amber Smith, so I'm hoping that her future releases will be a little bit closer to that. I listened to another audiobook this summer, and that was 99% Mine by Sally Thorne. I mostly picked this up because I really enjoyed Red, White, and Royal Blue, and I was like, hey, maybe I should get more into the new adult romance world and like pick up something that other people have been reading. Was not a good decision on my part because I did not like this book and gave it 2 out of 5 stars, and honestly looking back, I'm like, what did I like about this book to give it that extra star? So this is about a girl whose childhood crush comes back into her life, and she wants that dick so bad, my friends, so bad that she just is ridiculous for it. She's just crazy for the D the entire book, and that's all there is to it. What do I even say about this book? It was really ridiculous. I think what I liked is that like the main character is like an edgy, tough girl. She's hard, she's a bitch, and like that's not a type of character that we really get to see a lot in literature. Unfortunately, there's like no character growth whatsoever. She is stagnant throughout the entirety of the story, and all of a sudden it's like, I'm nice to people now. The characters were so possessive and unhealthy to one another, and it was just not enjoyable whatsoever. So yeah, this book was just not good from the writing to the plot to the characterization. I'm mad I read it. Honestly, all this book made me want to do was fuck my high school crush, and like that is not something I signed up for in 2019. Not worth my time. Next up, I read Somewhere Only We Know by Maureen Gu, which is all about a K-pop star named Lucky who's about to get her big break in America when she decides she wants to have a night of freedom from her very strict lifestyle. So she runs out into the streets of Hong Kong and ends up meeting a paparazzi named Jack who doesn't know who she is at first. This is another one that was just okay. A solid 3-star read. Cute and entertaining, very adventurous. I like a contemporary that takes place over just a couple of days. I did not like the writing style in this book. I was expecting a lot because Maureen Gu has like a very dedicated following and people rave about her books, so I was expecting a lot more than this amateur writing that I got. It's another book where I really had to suspend my disbelief, and I was like, okay, this is a thing I'm supposed to believe is happening, cool. Like, you're telling me that a paparazzi in Hong Kong does not know who the biggest K-pop star in the world is? And he didn't know because she wasn't wearing a wig. Whatever, it's fine. I had a little fun hating on some of the things that were just a little ridiculous in this book. I did like the relationship between the two characters. I loved all their bonding. It was a fun romantic storyline. So it wasn't that it was overall bad. I just did not enjoy it like as much as I thought I would. The next audiobook I listened to was Becoming by Michelle Obama, which is her autobiography. And I absolutely loved this book. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. It was such a fascinating reading experience because I had grown up learning about the Obamas from afar, but it was just absolutely fascinating to hear about it from Michelle's perspective. I have always really admired Michelle Obama, but I've gained so much respect for her in seeing how she has been unapologetically dedicated to herself for her entire life. She's never let other people make decisions for her, and anytime they did, she learned from it. It was really interesting to learn about how much her life as well as her family's life changed when Barack was running for president, and how she made such an effort to not only preserve normalcy in her own family's life, but also incorporate more general citizens and make the White House a more welcoming place. I loved the audiobook of it. Like, any book that is narrated by their own author is always amazing in my opinion. Her writing style was just so easygoing, and it was honestly like listening to a story from a friend as opposed to one of the most famous women in the world performing her memoir. I also never fully knew how accomplished she was. Like, I of course knew that she, was a very well-educated woman, that she had a successful career and all of the causes that she promoted as First Lady, but hearing about the actual things that she has done throughout her life and what projects she has created and followed through, I was really blown away. The next audiobook I listened to this summer was Hello Girls by Emily Henry and Brittany Cavallero. This is sort of a Thelma and Louise inspired story about two girls, one who comes from an abusive household and another that comes from a poor household with a brother who's a drug dealer. And it's all about them and how they decide to finally break free of their shitty lives and steal a car and go to Vegas. I was so pleasantly surprised with how much I loved this book. I'm honestly caught somewhere between 4 and 4.5 stars because, like, I really, really enjoyed my time listening to it. I love the characters. Both Lucille and Winona are super fleshed out and well developed. I loved reading about not only their friendship, which is super strong and powerful, but also their individual strengths and personalities. The plot of this book was so fun and entertaining. There was a lot of plotting and scheming and thieving and tricking, and it was very unique in that sense where a lot of the things that go on in this book I haven't really read about before. I loved it way more than I thought I would, so if you're looking for an exhilarating read about girl friendship, Hello Girls is something you must pick up. I picked up another memoir this month that I listened to on audio, and that is In the Country We Love by Diane Guerrero. If you haven't heard of her, she is an actress, and she wrote basically like a little autobiography about her parents being deported when she was 14. This is another book that really took me by storm. I absolutely loved it and gave it 4 or 4.5 out of 5 stars. It's a truly raw and unflinching story of not only immigration in America and what life is truly like for children of immigrants, but also she talks about her experience with depression, self-harm, and suicide, which was equally as moving. It really explores the longitudinal lifespan of trauma and of how what started impacting her as a teen really exploded into her adulthood. This is one of those works of nonfiction that have so many twists and turns. It feels like it could be a carefully plotted work of fiction, but it is someone's true life, and it was just really, really moving to learn about. The only thing I didn't love about this book is honestly, sometimes with the audio performance, Diane would like scream, and like I get that's like her personality and how she wrote it, but it was just a little much while I was listening. Honestly, I loved this book. It's so fucking amazing. Like, I want everyone to read it. If you're looking for an absolutely stellar work of nonfiction to dive into and to learn more about, especially one that is so timely and socially informed, it is one you should absolutely pick up. I've been listening to a lot of audiobooks, my friends. The next book I completed is Watching You by Lisa Jewell. This story follows a very typical neighborhood when one day a neighbor is murdered in their kitchen, and so the story is basically all of the neighbors trying to figure out what happened and who had a role in it. I unfortunately did not like this book like at all. I ended up giving it 1.5 stars. And that half star is very generous. Now, urban thrillers are probably my favorite kind of mystery when it's following like a small set of people in a big city. You know, there's a murder, there's some crime, there's some stalking. Like, I love those books. This one was so freaking boring. It was so unsuspenseful, no action, nothing happened. Picking up a book titled Watching You, I kind of knew I was in for some creepy watching, but I didn't realize I signed up to have adults just stare at each other for the entirety of the book. I didn't like any of the characters. They were super unlikable, whether they were just an absolute creep or if they were just dumb, or if they did not get enough development for me to have any reason to like them. The one interesting thing about this book is that it follows the perspective of an adult, but also two teens. And honestly, the teens did way more than the adults for the entirety of the story. They did like all the investigative work and found out all the clues, and the adults just wallowed in their own dumb problems. I hate this trope in thrillers with people in perfectly fine marriages just like are unfulfilled for some reason, and they like just have a connection to this other person, and it's so boring and tired and overused. Also, the pacing and timeline of this story is really confusing. All these characters are thrown at you in the very beginning, and it took me so long to figure out who was connected to who in what way. I shouldn't be questioning who is their sister and who is her husband like 3/4 of the way through the book, right? So yeah, overall, it was just not well written at all. I did not enjoy my time reading it. I said in my Goodreads review, the most exciting part of this novel was when I could return it to the library and start something else. I have been drawn to a few other Lisa Jewell books in the past when strolling through bookstores, and people seem to really like her books, so I'm wondering if this might have just been a fluke for me and I might enjoy something else from her in the future, but I'd be willing to give it a chance. So after that, in order to cleanse my ears, I decided to pick up another favorite of mine, and of course, that's going to be Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid. Yes, this was my third time reading it this year, and yes, I might read it a fourth. I've spent a lot of time talking about Daisy Jones and the Six on my channel. I don't think I need to dedicate much more. You guys know I love this book. You know it's my favorite of the year so far. I'm just entranced by the characters and the storyline of this fictional band and their rise to fame and why they broke up. It's a really, really incredible work of historical fiction if you have not picked it up yet. I mainly decided to pick it up because I actually went to my local library's discussion for it, where I just sat in a room with a couple of other women, and we basically just gushed about how much we loved it for 2 hours, and it was a really great experience. So I immediately knew that like the second I was done with watching you, I had to pick up Daisy Jones again, and I'm really happy I did. We've almost made it to the end. Thank you to anyone who is still watching me talk about all of these books. But the next one I completed over the summer is The Truth About Keeping Secrets by Savannah Brown. This is the story of a girl whose father, the town therapist, is killed in a car accident, and the main character, Sydney, begins getting some mysterious, hateful texts that make her think that it wasn't an accident after all. This is a bit of a complicated one to talk about because I really, really liked this book. Like, so much. It was one of those experiences where I felt I actually slowed down how much I was reading because I wanted to savor the story. I was completely entranced by the writing style of this book. It's another one that was super impressive for a debut, and I cannot wait to read whatever else Savannah Brown puts out. I loved the two main characters of this story so much, June and Sydney. It was especially exciting because this is a story that follows a lesbian main character, and we don't get a lot of LGBT representation in thrillers, so it was super fun to read about it from that perspective. I think it does a fantastic job of exploring grief and sexuality and complex relationships. Sydney develops what I consider to be like a pretty toxic and unhealthy infatuation with another person that was really interesting because I have so rarely seen that explored in books. And also it talks about like a lot of stress on a friendship and how things can go wrong there. So I really enjoyed both of those. The entire book is super intriguing, but the mystery thriller plotline was very slow paced. I found the twist at the end to be pretty predictable, so it didn't blow me away. Honestly, any other book that I felt this way about the plot, it would probably get like a 3-star rating, but I really became so attached to the characters, and I was just like floating on air with this writing style that it made it a really enjoyable reading experience. Definitely want to read more from Savannah Brown in the future, but if you like mystery thrillers, it's definitely one I'd recommend giving a chance. We have finally made it to the final audiobook I listened to this summer, and that is The Life Between Us by Greer Hendricks and Sarah Pekkanen. I picked this one up because my sister had actually borrowed it from me, and she really loved it, so I decided I would give it a chance because we both had enjoyed the author's other book, An Anonymous Girl. This is an adult thriller about a woman who begins stalking her ex-husband's new fiance. This book kind of took me for an interesting ride, but I ended up settling on a rating of, I think, 4 stars, maybe 3.5. I finished it recently, so I don't really know how I feel. When I started it, I was enjoying it. It reminded reminded me a lot of the feelings I got when listening to An Anonymous Girl, which was very similar, but I also just tend to like reading from the antagonist's point of view in a thriller. It was really entertaining to read about this woman stalking another. What I wasn't prepared for is the twists in this book. Like, honestly, some people could probably predict some of them. I'm not saying they are the most like shocking, but they were really surprising to me, and it totally transformed how I feel about the book. Did I just fucking say field? How I felt about the book. So the first twist came and I was like, oh shit, like I cannot believe this. I got even more intrigued in it and the story got even better. It was super suspenseful and engaging. Like, I really could not put the first 3/4 of this book down once I started reading. Unfortunately, around like the last quarter, like more twists started coming and they kept getting less believable and I was liking the direction less. So I didn't really enjoy the ending as much. There's some times where you're reading a book and you see things start going off course and you just want to yell at the author like, no, stay on what you were doing, that was great. I did like the very, very last twist. I thought it was super clever, but it was just some of the events leading up to that and like the eventual path of the story that I didn't enjoy as much as the beginning. So I don't think it's necessarily like the strongest book out there, but I really enjoyed it. It was very entertaining. If you're a fan of thrillers and like want one that's going to keep you really engaged, I think The Wife Between Us is definitely one I'd recommend. So that is it for every book I read this summer. Now that I'm all caught up, you guys can definitely expect normal monthly reading wrap-ups that are a reasonable length from me. In the comments below, I am super excited to hear if you have any thoughts on the books that I read this summer and also what are some of the books that you finished over your summer vacation. But that is it for this video. Thank you guys so much for watching and I'll see you soon for a new one. Bye!